Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Tim, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Finally, after all these times, we got it in the books, got it back again. I wanted to have you back on because there's a few things we really didn't discuss. We kind of jumped right into the Kennedy subject on the last one, but I wanted to get your understanding of who Lyndon Johnson was as a president. Feel free to give me what the public probably thinks of when they think of Lyndon Johnson, and then give me what you've learned through your research on Lyndon Johnson. Obviously, the Johnson politics is kind of the fun little route.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of interesting things about Lyndon Johnson as president. And even as he had more obviously power as president, but as vice president, he actually lost a lot of his power because he had been Speaker of the House and able to influence so much else in our government through that position. That is a very powerful position. We all know how he became president, and there's a lot of conjecture there about that. But as president, and one backdrop to that, as vice president, he actually ordered the murders of two individuals as vice president. I think we've talked about that before. As president, he is probably remembered for passing the first sweeping social bill, if you will, called the Great Society. And I don't know if you've heard of that. I think it was called the Great Society or something like that. It was the first big social reform type of legislation aimed at a more equitable distribution of government benefits to people who needed it. So he's remembered for that. He is also, in a negative way, remembered as the president who increased our presence in Vietnam and furthered the causes of a lot of people that he was kind of in cahoots with: Texas Big Oil, the American Industrial Military Complex, and things like that. His whole, and he's also, of course, remembered for forming the Warren Commission, which his advisors told him as he came up for re-election that if he didn't put to bed all of the quote unquote conspiracy theories involving President Kennedy's assassination, that it would hurt his chances for election. And so he formed that commission. He didn't even tell any of the members of the commission before he announced it, which is interesting. He put Allen Dulles, who Kennedy had fired as the head of the CIA, in charge of the Warren Commission. Dulles hated Kennedy with a passion. And most people these days know that the Warren Commission was formed with a decision already given to them, that they would find Oswald as the lone shooter, that they would disavow any conspiracies as to who might have killed Kennedy, that they would not enter into the record any witnesses who had a differing opinion of what had gone on in Dealey Plaza, including the number of shots, who may have been involved, et cetera, et cetera. So the Warren Commission was a puppet committee with their outcome already pre-decided. And there were several members of the Warren Commission who were fairly vocal after it was published, including, as you know, the gentleman, forgetting the name now, who disappeared on the plane flight, never to be seen again. Can't bring his
Dag
name.
Hammarskjöld?
No. No, this is a member of the Warren Commission.
Hale Boggs.
Hale Boggs, thank you very much. Yeah. So he disappeared. He had gone to Alaska to help politic for a fellow politician, and they both disappeared on a flight and have never been seen since. The plane has never been found. None of the wreckage, just disappeared, quote unquote, in the thin air. Hard to believe, but that's what happened. And ultimately, what caused Johnson not to run for president in 1968, excuse me for that. I thought I had turned that down, sorry. Was the Vietnam War. He was beginning to feel guilty, and and that weighed heavily on his decision not to run again. So now, as time has gone on and he has been judged as to his actions as a senator, as a vice president, as president, there's a lot that has come out about things that he did while in office, while in those three roles that today would have landed him in prison with absolute certainty. So he's and my co-author and I, Gary Fannin, who you know, have decided that there are 5 books currently. Our next book is going to be called LBJ Marked for Death, with a subtitle of The Texas Antichrist. And personally, and I mean this, the fact that there's anything in this country named after LBJ is a travesty, and it should be eliminated, including his presidential library. He was a murderer. He was ruthless. You know, there is a story I've heard. It supposedly came from a Secret Service agent who witnessed it 2 days after Kennedy's assassination. Johnson was in the White House. Jacqueline Kennedy was still in the White House, you know, getting prepared to move out, obviously. And one of the things that Jacqueline was most proud of as First Lady was the rose garden that she had, had put in the White House. Very beautiful rose garden. And according to this Secret Service agent, Johnson is outside the White House, near or at the rose garden, and he looks up and sees Jacqueline looking out from the second floor and proceeds to, in full view of her, urinate on the roses in the rose garden. Which sounds completely like something he would do. It's the ultimate FU, just like him demanding that Jackie be on the airplane on Air Force One when he was sworn into office. There was no reason for her to be there, but he literally demanded that she would be there in her blood-splattered pink suit while they took the oath of office. And of course, there's the famous photograph of him winking Texas right before taking the oath of office. So Johnson, to say he was evil is probably an understatement. And I don't know what most people think of his legacy. I think most people have no idea of some of the atrocities that he committed in his lifetime to gain power, to move to the next position. And I mean, the very first one that we know of course, was the Box 13 scandal when he was running for senator. And when the first vote was over, he had lost. And all of a sudden, they come up with 236 votes out of nowhere. They're all the same name. They're all in, or if they weren't the same name, they were all in alphabetical order. Of the 236 votes, one was for his opponent. The rest were for him. The strength of that, the Texas Voting Commission, or whatever they were called, ruled that those votes were legal. And of course, he won that election and became senator. So from way back in 1948, people knew that he was not above board. His campaign manager during that election was none other than soon-to-be governor of Texas, Connally. So that's very interesting as well. He and Connally had been in bed forever. And of course, what is most amazing, to me at least, is that during the assassination, Connally was riding right in front of President Kennedy. Johnson did not want that, but Kennedy told him he's going to have to sit somewhere else, or we're not going to have a parade. And Connally was in fact the one who convinced Kennedy to come to Dallas in November when he was assassinated. there's a lot of real murky, clandestine stuff that has gone on on behalf of Lyndon Johnson, going at least way back to 1948 through his president. And another thing I will tell you that I believe is that we know that Kennedy was going to have us out of Vietnam completely by the end of 1964. I think there had been something like 87 deaths in Vietnam before Kennedy got assassinated. And immediately, Johnson revoked Kennedy's memo to that effect, presidential executive order. Thank you. Johnson revoked that. First thing he did as president, revoked that and invoked his own that began sending more troops to Vietnam. So in my mind, he is responsible for 55,000 deaths in Vietnam through his actions.
I'm agnostic on Vietnam because I think everyone's basing it off of the fact that Kennedy was experiencing real change and that he probably would have pulled out troops. I like to think so, but we just don't have evidence and we don't know because he was killed before anything could really happen. But one thing, like I don't believe Johnson.
Well, Bobby, I beg to differ on that.
Okay.
Because his executive order is a matter of record. And he had issued an executive order to have all troops out of Vietnam by 1964.
When was that executive? By the end of 1964.
Yes.
Okay.
That is a fact.
Okay, but that bill never went in and never got because Kennedy was killed, right?
No, he never had a chance to enforce it or to engage the right authorities to make sure it was carried out.
But didn't Kennedy supply troops to Vietnam on the pressures of someone else?
Not to my knowledge. He inherited Vietnam. We had been in Vietnam since, I think, 1957, and it could have been even before that because it is now pretty much a known fact that the CIA was bringing heroin in through Laos, through South Vietnam, and making a lot of money off of it because the heroin was being brought into the United States for sale and distribution. And they were using the funds for that to finance all of their skunk work projects all over the globe. Monies that never had to be accounted for to anyone. And so the CIA had a very heavily vested interest in continuing the war on Vietnam.
I'll say, because for most historians I've spoken with, they've talked about that Kennedy was pressured. Kennedy did send more troops into Vietnam, but with the eventual goal was to pull out with that bill that you mentioned earlier. But that never went to fulfillment.
I find that hard to believe. He was also, for a couple of reasons. I mean, he may have sent people there, but I don't think they were American soldiers. I think they went in there under the auspices of being advisors, quote unquote. And I believe that's all we had in Vietnam while Kennedy was in office. I mean, there may have been a few soldiers to ensure their safety or something, but the soldiers were not sent there for combat, quote unquote. Kennedy was quoted as saying, in regards to the Vietnam War, it's their war, let them fight it. He did not believe we belonged there. And again, that's ultimately why he issued the memo to get us out of Vietnam by the end of 1964.
Like I said, I would still be agnostic on it because I think you can look at both sides, have plenty of evidence to support either theory on that one.
Yeah, and let me just make a comment on that, Robbie. I could understand you're being agnostic. However, if you're one of those people who was, I came very close to being drafted to go to Vietnam, but if you have ever been at the wall in Washington, D.C., and had to put a piece of paper up to get the name of someone who you knew who died in that war, I would suggest you would not be as agnostic.
Well, my grandpa fought in Vietnam, so I mean,
but he did not die. but he did
Yeah,
not die.
he didn't die, but I think that there's plenty of evidence, and that's why you said it was a controversial. And when before you even stated the Vietnam thing was because there's varying opinions on it. I don't think there's a conclusive. Like I said, I like to think that he would have pulled out, but that's a topic that I would stay agnostic on, just on the factor of you're basing it off of his recent changes and decisions while in office compared to what he was actually implementing, which is what most historians go off of. I think Johnson sped it up and made it worse. I think Johnson continued to just make it that he should be the one that should be known for it.
I totally agree. I don't think Kennedy was known for the Vietnam War. I don't think anybody would ever say it was Kennedy's fault. But for the escalation, I agree with you 100%. People would say, people who know would say it was Johnson who did it, who was responsible. And that's why I repeat what I said before. In my mind, he's responsible for 55,000 deaths in Vietnam and should burn in hell for it.
Jesus.
Because it was all done to line the pockets of his buddies in Texas, the American Industrial Military Complex, the CIA, everybody. They were all in bed with him, and the man's evil. He's just evil.
I think I have a different take on Johnson. I don't like him, but I think that his way of doing politics was quite interesting, mostly because I think he was the only person that probably could have made Hoover retire, even though he made Hoover stay in office till life, whatever. He gave him the whole title and everything. But there's a quote from him saying where I'd rather have Hoover on the inside of the tent pissing out than on the outside pissing in. And even though they were friends, there's a weird thing that Johnson politics, if you ever see him handshake somebody and he's leaning all the way over him, I go, him and Hoover could easily have just butted heads but they both probably had dirt on each other, had that deadly friendship, where they both had blackmail on each other. But Johnson was the only person in my mind that I could think of that could have put Hoover or matched him and made him retire. And in my opinion, if it would have went, they would have not had this good relationship or this blackmail relationship. Johnson could easily got Hoover right out of office or right out of his position.
Yeah, I do agree with you. They were in what I call a deadly embrace, right? Because they did have dirt on each other. And so they were it was like a Mexican standoff or one of those things, right? And they knew each other very well. They lived next door to each other for a large number of years. They were best of friends, each of them knowing that the other could do the other serious harm to their careers if they wanted to, and that's why they never did. And Kennedy had already told Hoover that when he hit 70 during Kennedy's next administration, that he was going to be forced to retire. And one of the very first things Johnson did was name Hoover FBI director for life. So that was in some regards a payback to Hoover for his involvement in the Kennedy assassination. So
I think Hoover and Johnson's careers are the two clearest examples of complete corruption when it comes to positions of power in our office, whether it was money that they were getting or whether it was just the way that they did business and when things with blackmail. I think if you look at them, they both had probably what I would call the more, not alpha, but the more like fraternity bro style of leadership that everyone can point at and be like, that's insane that that's in our office right now or at the time.
Well, to whether it was fraternity brother or something else, no one dared question their authority. And if they did, they would face some kind of reprimand for that. No one questioned Hoover. And if they did so within the FBI, they did it very, very quietly. And the same thing with Johnson. Johnson was known as a guy you did not mess with. You did not question. You did not seek to undermine his authority, because if he found out, Lord knows what could have happened to you.
Now, one of the people that you mentioned that got killed in their car was shot a couple of times. I think, and then there was a carbon monoxide tube that was put in there to make it look like it was going to be a suicide or something. Did that guy mess with Johnson's oil plans or something to do with one of his companies that he had? Because I think I was looking deeper into that when you mentioned it, and they were talking about Mac Wallace's connection to it and how Mac Wallace even got on the scene about it. But it was about some business interests that LBJ had through big oil. And that there wasn't, I guess they tried to pay him off and it didn't work, or he wouldn't accept the bribe or something like that, or the replacement, and he ended up getting just killed.
Yeah, that was, and by the way, this happened while Johnson was vice president. There was an agricultural executive in Texas that threatened to expose Johnson's dealings with Billy Celestes with illegal cotton allotments. And basically what they were doing, it was like a pyramid scheme. So they would kind of sell it and then buy it back, and it was totally illegal. Some considered it a legal form of money laundering, if you will. But this agricultural executive, while Johnson was vice president, threatened to, Henry Marshall was his name, he threatened to make that public, right? And so Johnson attempted to bribe him by offering him a position in Washington. He refused the bribe, all right? This guy had a big farm in Texas somewhere, not sure where. So Johnson, Mac Wallace, I think it was Billy Celestes, and one other gentleman met to discuss what they should do about it. And Johnson said, let's get rid of him. And so he dispatched Mac Wallace, who was his hitman, to dispatch the guy. And so Mac Wallace went to the farm, found Henry Marshall way out in the middle of nowhere on his farm, and shot him a couple of times, right? Then he puts the guy in the car, right? And proceeds to make it look like he died of carbon monoxide poisoning, right? Now, the interesting part of that is that the whoever the sheriff of that county was, by the way, a day passed before his family finally found him, and I think he was at this point leaning against the car, slumped against the car on the ground with the rifle next to him, and they claimed it was suicide, right? Forget about the carbon dioxide poisoning, even though that he did have a lethal amount of carbon dioxide in his body at the autopsy. But his family found him, reported to the police. Sheriff comes out, and the sheriff ruled it a suicide, right? How does a guy shoot himself 3 times with a shotgun? You don't do that. So, interestingly enough, and against Texas law, no autopsy was done. So his family kept pursuing this, and I think it was some 20 years later, they finally got exhumed his body, did another kind of necropsy or autopsy or what have you, and got the official cause of death changed to either manslaughter or murder or something like that. But nobody, of course, was ever brought to trial. Mac Wallace was dead. Johnson was dead. I think probably anybody that was involved was dead. And so this is just another one of many heinous crimes committed by Lyndon Johnson to stay in power. Because had that come out, he would have been removed from office at some point.
Could you explain to me a little bit more about Billy Celestes, who he was, and kind of what he was to Johnson, at least? Because I think we talked a lot about Mac Wallace, which we can get to later on. But Billy Celestes, I know he said something after he got arrested and actually came out with a statement, but I think, it was a lot of people didn't believe him when he said it. But I think it's a lot of the stuff that you've talked about in the past, which I'm wondering, is that who you go off of, is Billy Celestes? I don't know who he is.
Yeah, well, he was a Johnson crony. He was involved in the illegal cotton allotment scheme. And he was party to most of the murders that Johnson ordered. And when I say he was party to, again, there was this little gang of 4. I can't remember the 4th gentleman's name, but it was Johnson, Billy Celestes, and Malcolm Wallace. 3 or 4 musketeers, if you will. And Billy Celestes was intimately involved, and he knew all of Johnson's dirty secrets besides murders. So at some point, and Johnson, I believe, was dead by this point, Billy Celestes went to jail. And he went to jail. It was The old, if we can't get him on this other stuff, we'll get him on income tax. And that's why he went to jail.
That's why you pay
Um,
your taxes, people. They will screw you any way they can if you don't.
if you want to talk about another ruthless, along with the Federal Reserve, bingo. The IRS and the Federal Reserve, boy, woo, they answer to nobody. It's interesting. So anyway, Billy Solesky spent some time in jail. And in a bid to get out, he had his lawyer send a letter, and this letter it's a public letter. Anybody can find it. He offered, in exchange for Billy Solesky's getting out of prison and being given immunity forever on anything else, provided a list of 8 names of people that Johnson had ordered killed, including Johnson's sister and including President Kennedy. And I do not remember what the outcome of that was. I think whether it was the Department of Justice or whoever ultimately decided that the letter had no valid validity to it, and just put it aside and never acted on it. So, and I'm not totally sure about this, but Billy Solesky may still be alive. I'm not sure.
Damn, really?
Possibly, because I saw a picture of him on Facebook or something.
Shit, send him a friend request. What are you doing? Send him a friend request.
Oh, no. If he is still alive, he's a very old man. And
hopefully he has like Alzheimer's or something. You might be able to get some cool information out of him.
well, you never know. There were so many shady people involved with Lyndon Johnson. Ed Clark, who ran the most powerful law firm in Texas, who Johnson was a client, and Johnson's lawyer, a gentleman who I know by the name of Barr McClellan, was Johnson's lawyer for 6 to 8 years through the Ed Clark law firm. And Barr wrote a book called Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ killed JFK. And he said, I know as his lawyer that he killed John F. Kennedy to become president and to stay out of jail. So, you have some of that kind of knowledge of the man and his dealings and his power and the depth of his evilness. Coming out with a book like that, you got to put a lot of credence to it.
Do you think the motive came from because he lost to JFK in the election or the campaigns?
That's an interesting thought. There may have been some of that. Johnson wanted to be president more than he wanted to take his next breath.
Well, Nixon even stated in I think expletives. There's an interview, you can look at it. He says LBJ does not like to come in second. And and the difference between me and LBJ is LBJ. I forgot what he said. He said LBJ had the means or knew how to get to first or something like that, and Nixon didn't have the enthusiasm or the effort to want to go that far.
Actually, the quote, and I have to paraphrase it, was something along the lines of, I wanted to become president as well. I just wasn't willing to kill for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, something to that effect. Again, Nixon was as crooked as they come as well. His old, I'm not a crook. Yeah, you are. You had dealings with the mafia.
He's the only one that didn't have a sexual scandal, I feel like, though, because I think in a lot of his speeches, if you analyze it, I think that's where his sexual politics came out, because he talks a lot about thrusting and sensitivity and climax and all this. And I'm like, there's no way that you speak like that normally, you weirdo.
Yeah. He was definitely a weirdo. There's no doubt about it. But he was just as evil. And, he was at the Murchison party on November 21st, 1963, along with Gerald Ford, and head of the World Bank, head of the CIA, Hoover, and others. So he knew about it. Because all the men went into a room. Now, Nixon may not have gone in the room. I think he had left the party at that time. But I think I'm fairly certain he had knowledge of what was going to happen.
Now, is there any more information on the Murchison party that went on besides Madeline Brown's just video interview talking about it? Because I need another source to try and look at that as proven.
Yeah, I believe that Murchison's housekeeper as well made some kind of a statement. At one of his housekeepers, there were many, made a statement about who had been there. I don't have that factual information. I do remember hearing that. Of course, nobody was there is going to admit to being there,
Yeah.
because that would automatically implicate them. It is somewhat interesting that none of their underlings ever came forward to corroborate that. But the way I look at what Madeline Brown said was, there was no reason for her to say that. She knew Lyndon Johnson as well as anybody. She bore his illegitimate child. And if you've ever looked at a picture of the child, he's the spitting image of Lyndon Johnson. You would know immediately that it was his illegitimate son. So I believe her testimony to the core. I have no reason to question it. And if that's all we had, in my opinion, that's enough.
What about Johnson and the way that he kind of ran as president when it came to like the deep political stuff? Obviously, the more stigmatized stuff, like we could talk about, I mean, there's varying different sexual things that happen with Johnson in office that does not fit the description of what you want to have as a president. But there's a lot of dark stuff about Johnson. I feel like the public just doesn't know, but it's out there. That information is real. It is recorded by history books and by documentation. But to me, it's just fascinating. You start looking deeper down into who he was. I had a White House ethics person on my show, and he called me a conspiracy theorist for mentioning that Johnson pissed on a Secret Service member's leg, and he used to show his balls around to people. I had to put a disclaimer in the episode with the factual proof of it.
Yep. Well, he was known and did it several times for pulling his Johnson out and saying, because I'm the president, that's why, right? Several times. And his nickname for his Johnson was Jumbo. So
Fucking weird, man. I'm telling you.
apparently he was very proud of it. And actually it was Nixon. It was Nixon or Johnson that was holding the dog up by the ears, not off the ground, but he kind of held the dog by the ears and lifted it up with back feet still on the ground. It was either Johnson or Nixon. I don't know. I think it was Johnson, but I can't say for sure. But he was, he was rough, coarse, profane. He had a reputation for being an evil, not an evil, but a nasty drunk. And he liked to drink. That's one of the things Madeline Brown made note of. That's why she didn't question him the night before when he made the comment about what was going to happen the next day after the Murchison party, because she didn't want to confront him. He'd been drinking. So, yeah, I mean, the man, he bullied his way through his presidency. Let's put it that way. His word, it was either, it's my way or the highway way to characterize his presidency. And anybody who got in the way, God help him. God help him.
What about the Secret Service? Do you think they feared him, or do you think that they respected him?
I think fear and respect go hand in hand to a degree, because you earn respect one of two ways. You either earn it through fear, or you earn it through being an upright person, being known as a man of his word, et cetera, et cetera. There's two ways you earn respect, and Johnson's respect was earned through fear and intimidation. So yes, I think they respected him, but they don't respect him the way one might respect the Pope or might respect someone else, in authority like that. I don't think a lot of Hoover's people respected him other than out of fear. I think a lot of the people in Germany respected Hitler out of fear, rather than, oh, he's such a good guy and he's doing great things for everybody. So, yeah, I mean, there are thousands of stories about things that went on during the Johnson presidency and during his whole career in politics. It was all fear and intimidation, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the old FUD word. That's how he ruled.
What about the relationship between him and Connolly?
Well, again, it goes way back to at least the Box 13 scandal in 1948. And again, what I think is most interesting is he grudgingly agreed to put Connolly in the front seat of the limousine during the motorcade in Dallas. Connolly never went after Johnson. I mean, it's interesting. That's how deep the friendship was. That he had to know, this is Connolly, when he went into that front seat, that he was going to be in harm's way. And I don't know if he talked to Kennedy during the motorcade. Mrs. Connolly, right before Kennedy got shot, can't say Dallas doesn't love you. And then bang, right? It's interesting. The only thing Connolly did to call into question what happened in Dallas that day, afterwards, he said during a press conference that he was not hit by the same bullet that hit President Kennedy, which automatically throws the magic bullet theory right out the window. But he also still had the bullet in his leg, which means, according to the Warren Commission, there's now a fourth shot. The Warren Commission claimed 3, but here's 4 because it's still in his leg. Found on the stretcher, 1 bullet hit Kennedy, and another bullet completely missed and hit the gentleman in the underpass with a fleck of concrete. So, right there, everything the Warren Commission claimed is thrown completely out the window, beyond any shadow of a doubt. So I think that was the only time that, and I don't think Connolly did it on purpose either. I don't think he understood the implications of what he was saying. But his admission or his claim that he was not hit by the same bullet that hit Kennedy, and given the fact that that bullet was still in his leg, is pretty interesting. But to my knowledge, he never openly went against Johnson for anything. They were thick, so to speak.
Can we discuss more about Air Force One after Kennedy's assassinated and the whole LBJ wink photograph, who he was winking to, and also just maybe some conversations, if you know of any, that happened on Air Force One? I read over it because specifically looking at the missing code book, that should have been there, that wasn't there, so they had to talk on open channels. But I think everyone knows the photograph. But I mean, Jackie Kennedy's covered in her husband's blood, and she has to stand there with a tear in her eye as Johnson's being sworn in, which was just for show. He didn't have to do that. He immediately was president when Kennedy was killed.
Yep. That was the first official FU to the Kennedys, among several. And we all know that the Secret Service had no right to take the president's body out of Dallas County, because it was not a crime to kill the president at that time. So it was plain and simple, it was a murder that took place in Dallas County. The Dallas County coroner should have done the autopsy. Ultimately, as they're wheeling the president's body out of Parkland Hospital, and the coroner is right there protesting, this is a murder in Dallas County, the autopsy. The Secret Service knew that if he had done the autopsy, it would have thrown any conspiracy theory right out the window. Or the idea that Oswald was a lone shooter. And ultimately, the Secret Service drew guns on the coroner and took Kennedy's body illegally out of the hospital and put it on Air Force One. What's interesting is the casket that they ordered was, if it wasn't ordered before the assassination, it was ordered within minutes afterwards, I believe before the president had officially been declared dead. But so, they got on Air Force One, the casket's now on board. If you look closely picture of Johnson taking the oath of office with Jacqueline Kennedy right beside him. And in my mind, when I look at her, I feel she was just in complete shock. Didn't really understand what was going on. And anyway, look closely at the picture, and in the back of the audience, there's about 18 people, in the picture. And then there's a door going to the back of the plane. There were two Secret Service agents standing at the door, making sure that no one got back there. Okay. And so I do believe that while they were in, a couple of things happened while they're flying back to Washington, D.C. I think they switched caskets. I think the damage to the back of the president's head to make it look like he actually had been shot from behind. And in fact, one of the people at Bethesda, when they got there, made a comment about there's been surgical repair to the back of the head. So it's clear that somebody cosmetically altered the president's head during that flight. And there is a name that's always mentioned who we believe was on the flight. I cannot remember the gentleman's name.
Jesse Curry was on there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can look if you look at the photograph. There's Jesse Curry in the photograph when Lyndon Johnson's being sworn in. His face is right there. I don't know how he got on Air Force One, considering he's just a police chief. But yeah, he was there.
I did not know that. I'll have to look at that.
And he wrote a book later on in life that Hoover ended up blackballing him and getting him discredited on everything. But he talked about he didn't believe that it was a lone assassin. He said he believed that it was someone like either Lyndon Johnson or someone that was involved from orchestrated power. If I'm not mistaken, I did the clip on it like months ago. But yeah, it's really interesting because Jesse Curry's face on that thing, I was giving him a lot of crap. And so my buddy's like, hang on a second. He wrote a book and there was a reason why Hoover went after him.
Uh-huh. Well, I think the reason was to, make sure he kept his mouth shut.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reason so many people disappeared. And that's the reason why the Warren Commission never called anybody who had an opposing idea of what really happened on Dealey Plain. They never took any testimony into account unless the people agreed with the fact that there were 3 shots and that Oswald was the lone shooter. And so what's interesting about Curry, and it's clear the Dallas police were involved and that they had prior knowledge of the assassination. Now that immediately, I think you can conclude that Curry was involved. And how do we know the Dallas police were involved? Because 6 weeks prior to Kennedy being assassinated, a gentleman who worked for the CIA by the name of Roscoe White joined the Dallas police force as a photographic assistant or photographic interpreter, whatever the name they gave him, which basically gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do within the Dallas Police Department. Interestingly enough, one of his partners for a short while was J.D. Tippit, the police officer that was shot at 10th and Patton. And when Roscoe White's son, Ricky, discovered his diary of assassinations that Roscoe had committed, along with the name of President Kennedy, was a statement, an officer at 10th and Patton. So Roscoe White, we believe, actually killed J.D. Tippit, not Oswald. And in fact, there were some people who claim they saw 2 people running from the scene. One would have been Roscoe White. The other, I believe, was Jack Ruby. And there were 2 different kinds of bullets found in J.D. Tippit's body. So you can draw your own conclusions about what really happened to him, but we think it was Roscoe White. In fact, in March of this year, Gary and I are going to meet with Ricky in Dallas and have a discussion about all of that with him.
What about the photograph with Roscoe White in the backyard with the rifle and the papers?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So And by the way, most people by now should know that Roscoe knew Lee Harvey Oswald very well. They had been in the Marines together, stationed in Japan, photographs taken by the U-2 spy planes. So they were in the Marines together, they knew each other, et cetera, et cetera. I believe, and I think many researchers believe, that from the time they were in the Marines together, the FBI was already keeping tracks of Oswald by this point. Oswald was, in fact, a CIA employee and an FBI informant. We believe that from at least 1960 on, Lee Harvey Oswald was being groomed to be the patsy. His friend in the Marines, Roscoe White, was being groomed to be the assassin. So we talked about this earlier, Rob, on the other podcast. That the more you dig, the more complex that entangles them all together. It's a very well conceived and orchestrated plot or play to have all of these things ultimately happen in Dallas and after Dallas in 1963. So, it's Roscoe was, when Ricky found his list of people he had killed, 28 people worldwide during and after the assassination, including President Kennedy and Officer J.D. Tippit, both whose murders were laid on Oswald and never proven. And in fact, the lead investigator, Jim, I think it was his last name, the guy in the white hat.
Jim Lavelle.
Lavelle, thank you. Lavelle is on record as having said, now he believed Oswald was this. Also said, if he had ever gone to trial based on the evidence, quote unquote, that we had on him, he would have never been convicted in any court of law. So, this is the lead investigator. So very interesting.
How much evidence or how much of the crime do you put on the collusion of the Dallas Police Department for manufacturing evidence and not giving Oswald the right to an attorney? I mean, there was an ACLU guy who visited, but it was a friend of Will Fritz. So he knew that he could have an inside man on that one. So whether he had a right to legal counsel really, or was it just good on paper? I mean, how much do you place blame at the Dallas Police Department's feet for just being a corrupt organization?
Well, I think they were very corrupt. And in fact, during that administration, the Curry-Fritz's administrations, there were a number of crimes committed in Dallas and in Texas that were never solved. And afterwards, years later, when you have organizations who are, trying to get people who were unjustly convicted out of prison and have convictions overturned, there were more convictions overturned county than in the entire state of Texas, based on fabricated or fictional evidence. And if you look at many of the people who went to their eternal lives, not to, pretend it's funny, but there were so many that were never should have happened under Texas law. No autopsy. Johnson's sister, Malcolm Wallace, many, many others. No autopsy ever done. It's against Texas law. So it speaks to the power of the people who were in power in those days in Texas, and in some days afterwards, that they could just, quote unquote, bury anyone who might have had any evidence to show that they died by means other than how they actually died. We believe Malcolm Wallace, well, we know he committed at least 8 murders, but it could have been 80 for all we know. Who knows? With all these people being buried with no autopsies, no one may ever know.
It leads you to look at corruption a little bit differently when you start examining things like 9/11 and other controversial, huge topics in our history that have not gone away. You kind of see that where the government or the political figures are doing side deals and transactions and selling guns to both sides or doing all these collusional efforts that start to lead into why the American people has to suffer and other people across the world have to suffer for the actions of a select few.
Yep. Well, and what's interesting, Robbie, is that I think what happened on November 22nd, 1963, was the beginning of American distrust with government. Okay, and it's only gone on and become deeper since. I think it is the worst day in American history for that reason. Up till then, uh, people revered the presidency. They had respect for it. Even if it was the other guy, you still had respect for it. And the parties actually worked together. And that all went away beginning in 1963 in Dallas. Um, there was tremendous uh, uh, support against the Vietnam War, tremendous support. And you had organizations like the Students for the Liberation of Society and the Black Panthers and organizations like that emerged in the mid to late 60s that were all outgrowths of Americans distrusting their government, quite honestly. Um, and it's only gotten worse since, in my opinion. I would be hard pressed to believe there's more than 50% of Americans who trust their government. In fact, I'd be surprised if it's more than 30% because
Why
they
do you
haven't
think?
given us a reason to trust them.
Yeah, but why do you think nobody ever stands their ground on anything? It's always got to boil down to a two-party system. It's always got to boil down to conspiracies. If you talk about a military-industrial complex or a deep state, it's like, well, I mean, presidents have mentioned it throughout history. For God's sakes, I'm having more respect for Truman on the basis of some words that he said towards the ending of his administration. He's very clear about corrupt agencies, especially the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, he asked after Dag Hammarskjöld's death, he made a press announcement saying he was on the verge of getting something done when they killed him. Notice how I said they killed him, and no press people followed up on that.
Of course, because by that time the press was already in bed, the media already in bed with whoever that organization was, Robbie, whether it was a deep state going way back then, or whether it was just simply a collusion that benefited everybody to not take into question things that our government did. You know, now today it's become very popular in the media to rail against the quote unquote other party, okay, or the other guy, if you will. And that never happened. Even Johnny Carson, at one point made a statement about, there's a reason I don't go in a mean, vindictive way, like is so prevalent today with people like Fallon and Kimmel, because they respected the office. And Carson said, there's nothing to gain by belittling our presidents and our politicians. And he'd make fun of them, right? But he would never take them to task or criticize them for anything they had done. And if he did, it was in jest. And today you have these talking heads, and they'll go after these guys like junkyard dogs if they're on the quote unquote other side. And when you have the CIA in control of both CNN and Fox News, purposely telling different stories, you got to wonder about every level of our government. And even, it boils down, it filters down to local governments. How many times do you read in your hometown daily newspaper about a local politician who's all of a sudden brought up on charges of corruption, bribery, whatever? That stuff didn't happen back in the day. I mean, and if it did, it wasn't, it was usually, I don't know, maybe they thought they were doing the right thing. I'm not saying, you know.
You can't do anything when you're in that position. There's a lot like what is it, 223 members of our House of Representatives in Congress that are funded by Big Pharma, where they're influencing bills on the basis of that. If you're on the outside of that and you speak out against that, you better hope to God you ain't walking to your car when a crowbar hits you in the back of the head. Like that's you're gonna get screwed over because you're messing with these people's financial interests now. You're not messing with their political power.
Yeah, and let's not forget that Big Pharma is totally in bed with the healthcare system,
Oh
right?
no, yeah, no, that's.
Robbie, I'm going to
I
tell you
think
something. No,
everybody's in agreement on that one.
yeah, I am, and that's why you go to one doctor because you have high blood pressure, and he's going to prescribe a pill, and you'll go to another doctor, and he's going to prescribe a different pill. Why? Because they're in bed with that particular manufacturer, right?
Well, Laurie Little is the one that's quoted saying that our duty is to our shareholders, not to our clients.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe today there's already a cure for cancer. I believe there's a cure for Alzheimer's. I believe there's a cure for baldness. I believe there's a cure for almost everything that afflicts our people today in terms of health. And why won't it ever be brought to public? Because look how much money these people would lose, how much power they would lose. And it's sobering to think that way, but I'm convinced, I'll go to my grave convinced, that these cures already exist.
I don't know about the cancer cure, but I will say that they do not fund a lot of money into cancer research. They only focus on cancer medications.
Well, there's one thing that is common to all cancers. At the base of all cancer is rapid cell multiplication. So these cancer cells get into your body and they take over, they consume everything, right? And they keep multiplying. So that's a common denominator. You can't tell me that they haven't figured out a way to, uh, get that early and kill it so that it doesn't spread to the body. With it being, one cause for all cancers, believe me, somebody's cured that already.
No, they're too worried, focused on how to get to Mars. That's what they're worried at. We can send a fucking rocket into outer space and burn all that gas in the air, yet we have to try and eliminate cows because they're affecting the climate.
Yeah. Now, I guess it's a fact that, well, I heard at one time that the leading cause of the erosion of the what do they call it? The whatever that protects our atmosphere, the erosion of well, that the single biggest cause of that was methane from cows, but actually it's methane from automobiles that affects that more than the cows. So the cows are being unfairly blamed.
Methane from, you mean just, I don't think it's methane. I think it's something else. Methane from cows, the cars don't do methane.
Well, there's some other cause I think that is
Unless your car's running on farts.
well, and that's another thing. I mean, this whole nonsense with electric vehicles, it's ludicrous because the charging stations are run on diesel fuel for those vehicles, and just disposing of those batteries when they're used up is more harmful to the environment than anything beforehand. Any kind of fossil fuel. So
well, especially if you believe like a lot of the Kennedy stuff and you go into the history books on like the real dark corrupted politics parts, you're going to be very fearful if every vehicle is going to be automatic driving. I think Ford Motor Company put out some type of commercial that was, and like I said, this is a kind of more conspiratorial, but they talked about that like if you missed payments, and I've talked to people about autonomous vehicles before, and they're like, yeah, you can't drive your car, like your company could just lock the car if they wanted to, and I was like, but what would cause that? They're like, if you broke a law, and I was like, well, what's a law? There are some dumb laws, man. Like connecting to someone else's Wi-Fi is illegal. You can get arrested for that, but a lot of people don't know that, but he was just mentioning like if you didn't pay a bill or something like that. I was like, yeah, but Ford just put out that if you missed a car payment, they could turn off the heat to your car. So imagine being in the middle of winter, you miss a car payment, they're just like, okay, you're going to go without heat if you're going to keep driving.
but I don't think that's ever happened, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, no, because we don't have the vehicles there for that. They're new. That's what I'm saying. Ford just put out a thing about that.
Well, um, this the self-driving vehicle is a two-edged sword, in my opinion. I've dreamed about vehicles that would drive themselves since I was a young boy. Uh, Here's why it'll never happen. Immediately, you cut the legs from the insurance industry, you cut the legs out of the automotive repair parts industry, the collision industry, the trucking industry, the bus industry, because there will be no more accidents. There will be no more drunk drivers. There will be no more old drivers who shouldn't be driving. There will be no more young children, young teenagers dying of speeding. Okay. All those things go away. And the economic impact of that is so broad, so sweeping, and so monetary, it'll never happen. They could do it today. And
They
if
have
you
all
want
they have automatic driving ones. There's a video of a person that didn't pay their car payment, and the company repoed the car back by just having the car drive itself back to the lot.
well, uh, yeah, the technology is already there, Robbie. They could do it if they wanted to. Right
Well,
now,
it's so
we could have
risky.
we could have been driving. Uh, we could have been occupants in vehicles that would drive themselves for 10 to 15 years going back. It's so easy to do it. It's so easy to do it.
I don't want that to happen though, because I do not trust that whoever's in power that's going to be able to lock my car if I can't use it.
Uh, yeah, the trust word is never brought up in any of those conversations
I mean, you
because
can say it's a conspiracy, but when you look at like 9/11 and all the things we gave up after 9/11 and the idea of safety, I mean, are we really safer as a country? We're still going to wars all the time. We're right now the Gaza issue with the Palestinians and the Israel. I mean, we're funneling money for weaponry to Israel. What is it? $3.8 billion as of now, the day that we're recording this, since October 2023. And then we're also doing not financial aid, we're doing medical aid for the people in Gaza. So you're funneling the weapons for the people that are bombing the people that we're also taking care of health wise. What is that? I don't understand that. That's ridiculous.
America and the state of Israel have been bedfellows for years and years, decades. And they are the guardians of our oil interests in the Gulf. And so we're in a deadly embrace with Israel. People don't understand that. We are, like it or not. We could hate the Israelis, but we're still going to be in bed with them to protect our oil interests in the Mideast. And so that's why. And by the way, 3.8 billion pales in comparison to what we've given to the Ukraine. And why are we involved there at all? If Kennedy was alive today, he would go, it's their war, let them fight it. Okay? We have no business being involved, except, oh, we're afraid of Russia. Well, Ukraine was part of Russia. Okay? It's Russia wanting back what is Russia. Let them fight it.
That's a dangerous subject. But hold on, I'm gonna ask about Josefa because that's what we got to get to that. But for the Vietnam thing in the beginning, he sent 18,000 mix of troops and advisors to Vietnam with a plan by the end of 1963 to withdraw 1,000 troops, and by the end of 1965 have all the rest of the troops and all the advisors pulled out. That was the thing that comes on history.com, and that's what most historians go by. Like I said, agnostic on it, because I like to think he would have pulled out. But from what I've communicated with other historians, that's their model of what they go on. So
Okay.
just thought I'd clear that
I
up.
wonder if those historians would lay the blame for that at the feet of Johnson.
I mean, I don't really blame the Johnson for it either, but that's just because I have a different perspective. But I don't know. I like to look at Johnson's deeper politics on things. Like I said, I think you already know I don't think Johnson did it, but I'm happy to listen to that one and hear your perspective on it. But why did he kill his sister? That's
Well,
the real question.
well, I'm not going to let you off the hook on the other one first. Johnson, at one point, after he had issued the executive order to increase our presence in Vietnam, whether it was with advisors or soldiers or equipment, said there, you've got your goddamn war. Okay. That was payback. That was Johnson's payback to Texas Oil, to the American Industrial Military Complex, and others for helping him get into office. And it's one of the reasons ultimately he was consumed with guilt for having increased our presence in Vietnam and all of the horror and tragedy that came with it. You know, you talk about 55,000 dead Americans. Let's talk about the number who came back with physical and mental wounds, right? Without limbs, without sight.
Wait, what is this? What is this rebutting? What is this rebutting?
I'm saying that Johnson's increasing our presence in Vietnam was payback to some of the industries and organizations that helped him get rid of Kennedy and come into office. You know, he quote unquote owed them, and this was, to some degree, it was his payback. I don't think he even wanted us to be in Vietnam, to tell you the truth. But I think he was in a deadly embrace with those organizations, and he had to give them something back. And at one point, he said, "Here's your goddamn war."
I know, but you said you weren't going to let me go on the point, so I just don't know what the point was you weren't going to let me go on. I agree that he increased troop involvement in Vietnam. There's not a conflict about that, but unless you're conflicting the point of me saying that he killed Kennedy, I don't believe he killed Kennedy. I think he made a lot of. I don't know why he would reject the Warren Commission privately in private conversation if he. Why would you not keep your ass covered?
You don't believe Johnson killed Kennedy?
I don't. I think I've told you this
I
multiple
mean, I know
times.
he didn't put the gun to his head.
I know that. But I don't. I think he definitely covered it up 100%. I just don't think he was one of. I believe military industrial complex, and I think I've told you that multiple times.
I think they were involved,
Okay.
but like Texas Big Oil was involved. But I don't think. Do you think he had knowledge of the assassination?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think he had knowledge of it. I mean, you can call it an unwitting or not unwitting, a knowing accomplice. Yeah, but I just don't think the order came from him. I think it was a different. It came from something else. I believe deep state 100%.
You know, I don't think the order came from him either.
Okay.
I think it came. Yeah. So we're in
When
agreement
when
there.
you say Johnson was involved in killing Kennedy, people start thinking that he's the one that's calling the orders. So I never believed that he was the one calling the shots on that one. I think someone told him, "Hey, this is going down," and he did nothing in his power to stop that. And you can tell afterwards. I mean, I think he was in charge of sending the limo to get repaired, and he was also in charge of getting JFK's clothes washed.
Yeah,
So
and either he or the Secret Service, because they're the only two people who could have done it, changed the motorcade route 2 days before. It was never supposed to be on Houston or Elm. It was supposed to go straight for turning. And 2 days before, it changed. And the only two organizations that could have done that were the Secret Service or Lyndon Johnson. So draw your own conclusions, but that is a fact. The FBI can't change it. The American Industrial Military Complex can't change it. Texas Big Oil couldn't change it. The Mafia couldn't change it. It was either Lyndon Johnson and or the Secret Service.
from the statements I've seen through the actual documentation, they state it was the Secret Service people that were talking to the Dallas Police Department about how the motorcade route was going to go. And that's when you start to see that the motorcade vehicles, the motorcycles on the left and right of Kennedy, were pushed to the back tires. And the excuse for that was that Kennedy didn't like how loud the motorcycle sounds were. And that's why they chose to do that. And the overall say of who does what or what goes on with the president, the Secret Service can override the president in any means to deem his safety. And so this theory that JFK didn't want Secret Service near him is ridiculous. I don't know.
It is ridiculous.
I don't know if Johnson had any idea of planning the route. I mean, even with the Connolly and the Yarborough incident, the reason why Yarborough wanted to ride with Kennedy and Connolly was supposed to ride with Johnson was because Yarborough and Johnson were having an argument and disagreement, and that is based in just the documentation I can find on it. But then I don't know if it was JFK or if it was Connolly that wanted Yarborough to ride with Johnson because they knew that they weren't on good terms apparently since they arrived in Dallas.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Kenny said he either rides with you or he walks.
Yeah.
Regards, Yarborough. Anyway, you asked me about Josepha. So
Joseph.
she was Johnson's sister, and they were close. Okay. She knew all his dirty secrets. Her Achilles heel, and what caused her to be done away with, was that she was a drunk and a drug user. And this is all can be verified. And Johnson ultimately became afraid that, under the spell of one or the other, that she would start to blab all of his dirty little secrets, and ordered Malcolm Wallace to do away with her. And so they were all at a Christmas party on Christmas Eve, Johnson, Wallace, Josepha, and others. And after the party, and Malcolm Wallace had at one point had an affair with, so he knew her very well. And I think it was either that night or sometime before, Johnson said to Malcolm Wallace, "We got to get rid of her." So Malcolm Wallace, at some point, Josepha leaves. I think she lived in Fredericksburg, which is not too far from Johnson City, and goes home. And at some point, Malcolm Wallace arrived, and ultimately she was found in her car, supposedly having died of carbon monoxide poisoning, which was Malcolm Wallace's MO. Okay. And we think what happened is he probably had her knocked out with, the handkerchief and some kind of thing that would knock her car, and set the car up to look like monoxide poisoning. And that's how she died. She was immediately buried, no autopsy. Again, interesting. And, because they couldn't, have anybody investigate. The coroner deemed it suicide, and there you go. No autopsy. So it's very interesting that you can have your own sister murdered on Christmas Day, and look yourself in the mirror. But either Johnson never looked himself in the mirror, or was such a psychopath, which is what I believe he was, or maybe not a psychopath, a sociopath,
Yeah,
that he felt no remorse about anything he ever did in office, because in his mind, it furthered his career and his ambition. And so anything and anyone was expendable. And if he thought they could be a conduit to bringing his behavior or past actions into the light, you would be disappeared. So Lord knows how many people Malcolm Wallace actually did kill on behalf of Lyndon Johnson, but I'll guarantee it was more than the 8 that Billy Solestes tried to bring into light to get himself out of prison. So it's
crazy you can shoot a person at putt-putt golf and then get off. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And again, yeah. So Kinsey was having an affair with Josepha and with Malcolm Wallace's wife. So somebody could go, well, Johnson didn't know about that. Perhaps. But when after a cold-blooded murder in the full view of like 12 witnesses, and then he gets pulled over some minutes later by the highway patrol, he goes, "You can't arrest me. I work for Senator Johnson." What? And then Johnson puts his buddy in charge as the judge, gets a hotel room during all the proceedings. The jurors come back. 11 wanted the death penalty. 1 wanted life in prison without parole. And the judge immediately took their verdicts into consideration, vacated that, sentenced Wallace to 5 years of probation, and then let him walk out of prison. He's the only person in the history of the state of Texas to be convicted of first-degree murder and walk out of jail or walk out of the courtroom that same day a free man, all based on the influence and the power of Lyndon Johnson. So pretty interesting. Yeah,
Good old
yeah.
Jumbo. Good old Jumbo.
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, where can
Great.
people find your links, Mr. Brennan?
So there's a link, a website that my co-authors and I have. It's we're arguing whether we should change the name. Right now, it's the
Wait,
JFK Assassination.
say it again. Your mic cut out. Say it again.
Okay, it's a website, www.thejfkassassination.com. Now, there's a lot of other stuff out there. There's our book and DVD on JFK Jr. There's a book on RFK. There's a book on JFK. There's a book on Oswald, and there's a book on Operation Mockingbird, which is CIA control of all the media and some of the lies we've been told about some of the important events in history, like the murder of JFK Jr., the murder of Dorothy Kilgallen, the Hale Boggs mystery, and other things like that. And as I said, our next book is going to be based on LBJ. And it's going to be quite a controversial book. Someone actually said, why don't you write a book about Hillary? Well, because she's still alive. She's still alive, number one.
She's not going to sue. She's just going to come after you with everything she got.
And that's what concerns us. I'm not afraid of the CIA. I'm not afraid of the FBI. I'm afraid of Hillary.
I'm afraid of Hillary too, but I'll keep talking.
Yeah. I want to keep talking. I want to keep breathing.
Mr. Brennan, I'm going to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you again. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of Blank. Stay tuned for next episode.